Dalail al-Khayrat, the waymarks of benefits. It was composed in the 15th century by the Moroccan Sufi scholar Muhammad Suleiman al-Jazuli. It was the first major book in Islamic history to compile the salawat, the litanies of blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It is said that al-Jazuli was inspired to write down the prayers after he witnessed a young girl make a well overflow with sweet water. To tell us more about this is Sheikh Muhammad Idris Watts, who has been involved in Islamic education for nearly 20 years, since he accepted Islam in 1998 while studying Arabic studies at Leeds University. Sheikh Idris then lived in the sacred city of Fez in Morocco, where he immersed himself in the language, culture, and knowledge of the region. 7 years later, he came back to England, bringing whatever he'd learned in North Africa to the communities of Yorkshire and Lancashire. Sheikh Idris will be giving us some more insight into the litanies, followed by a soul-stirring recitation by the Sheikh and his band of merry Muslims. And there'll be an opportunity to ask the Sheikh some questions after the devotional singing. So without further ado, I will hand it over for some illuminating discussion to the Sheikh. Thank you.
Right, assalamu alaikum to everybody. Peace be to you all, and welcome, and thank you very much for being part of this event and talk. Ramona, conveniently for me actually, spoke a little bit about Imam Jazuli and his, and I really want to start off really with his significance really, and why the Dalail Khayrat became such had such a hold on the Muslim community right up to this day really. We have to first of all put Imam Jazuli in a political and religious setting of the time where he was. And so we've got Imam Jazuli, and he's in North Africa, in Morocco to be specific. And Imam Jazuli, at that time of his growing up, Morocco was very, very unstable. This was really, I think, the beginnings of the Muslim population questioning whether they really are the superior power to be in the world. Because now we had obviously the Muslim and Jewish populations being pushed out of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Andalusia, and many of these refugees sort of spreading throughout North Africa and into the Middle East. And then also on top of that, it wasn't that they were being pushed out of Spain. The other incident that was happening as well is that the Portuguese fleets were actually attacking the Muslims. So it wasn't just an incident of them being pushed out of one land. It was now the actual the Spanish and the Portuguese were on the offensive and having the audacity to actually attack the Muslim countries. And so at this time of Imam Jazuli, you've got the Portuguese mainly taking over all the port towns around the whole of the country. And this really shook the identity of the Muslim consciousness at the time. And so there was a real sort of crisis, and there was an inner inquiry, and a lot of retrospection for the Muslims. Why, what's their position now? Why is this happening? And so Imam Jazuli felt there was a real impetus to really connect to the root principles of the religion and to the personality of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him specifically. And he was really frustrated, which is, when we look at this, he was really frustrated by the religious class. And he saw that they weren't tackling the relevant issues of society. And so he would lambast them and say, you guys are discussing fine details of theology and law, whilst your own families and communities are, committing all sorts of clear, forbidden acts. And so he was really frustrated. He saw that the scholars had no answer to the situation, and so they felt far more comfortable locking themselves in their ivory towers and discussing fine points of theology and law in order to sort of not have to deal with the situation. And he felt there was a real radical need to address vital issues concerning the Muslim community. He was really aghast at the social ills, and he said the social ills really was due to the lack of faith. And so he wanted to go back to the basic principles. And so this is the climate of the Dalail al-Khayrat in which it was composed. And the Dalail al-Khayrat itself is a devotional text in which there's meditation and repetition of the names, first and foremost, names on the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And then interestingly, it shifts from the names to a description of the tomb of the Prophet. And this is very, very significant why he's done this. And if you go to Medina, if you have the opportunity to go there, you'll notice that when people step into what they call the Bab al-Salam, the gate of peace, where this is where a Muslim will be entering this gate of the mosque in order to convey his greetings to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, directly. And so, as he's going through that gate, on his right, you will see the names of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, all across the wall, which are the names of the Dalail al-Khayrat. But interestingly, a few of them have been changed according to the theology of the Saudi government. They're not best pleased with some of the names. So there's been some alterations across the wall there. So what you're doing is, this is why the names are so significant for a Muslim, is that it's seen as a doorway, a gate into a connection with the Prophet by meditating on his names. So as the person's walking towards the grave, he is meditating on these names. And Imam Jazuli, he brought this into the Dalail al-Khayrat at the beginning of the book because he saw that these names are a means to actually gain a personal connection. And then so he gives a whole description of the graves after the names, and hadiths, prophetic traditions, and relations of the statements of his companions about who's buried there, where exactly they're situated, and the significance of this. And then the rest of the book is these devotions of sending peace and blessings on him and conveying all his different attributes. So it's sort of an introduction. And so this is why Imam Jazuli felt the names have to be put there at the beginning. Now when I became a Muslim, I was here in the Yorkshire area, and then I soon was whisked off in my second year of my Arabic studies to Fez. And I had no knowledge of the Dalail al-Khayrat. And so when I actually came there, and I went into the ancient city of Fez as an 18-year-old white boy from Kent, and you've got this absolutely beautiful mausoleum where the Dalail al-Khayrat is read on a Friday after the mid-afternoon prayer, al-Asr, and the people would sit in the mausoleum of the the founder of the city, Moulay Idris II. And it's like the center, the epicenter of the whole city. Really, what they say about Fez is that that's where it was founded, and then it just spread out. And so it's like Joseph Campbell talks about, it's like the world naval, or the local naval of the community. And so this was really significant for me. It's a connection to a founder of something, and it's a connection to a beautiful tradition that manifests that it's rooted at something beautiful, and it's continuing. And for me, as a young boy feeling very disconnected from his culture, coming from a broken home, this was very important for me and gave me significance. And so and then not just that, when we're sitting in Moulay Idris, what I was astounded by was you were sitting in, the mausoleum of Moulay Idris is a real hustle and bustle. You've got people, all sorts, coming in and out. And right in the corner, you've got this huge group of people, one line of them sitting in line with one another, and another line facing them, and they were knocking back the names back and forth. And so we're going to try to demonstrate this today with the few numbers we have, is that it was two-sided. and they'd be bellowing their guts out with this stuff, shouting. And I was just standing there going, wow, the youngest of the young to the oldest of the old, a whole community. And the only thing really that I could liken it to, and one of my friends highlighted this, was once we finished, he was from Liverpool, my friend, and he finished, he said, that was like being at the stands in Anfield, that was. Okay. And really, he encapsulated what it's all about, because if you think about it, football brings the young and the old together into sharing something that they're passionate about. And from a religious perspective, we've lost that sort of connection. And it was something that was so simple. The Dalail Khayrat itself is not simple, as many of the people recited it with me. It's quite tricky, but the names were something very simple. So when I finally left Morocco and I came back to England, I really felt there was a need as a community to come together and just to recite something as a collective that would bond people, because I felt there was a real disparity between the elders and the youth. And there was a real lack of connection for many of the youth with the mosque. And so I wanted to really, my ideas for this was to have a gathering of people where we were doing this, taking this to different people's homes, and we were showing people that the religion can connect people regardless of your background. And so when I started it, there was a few of us in my small back-to-back house in Bradford near Lister Mill. There's a few of us. We would go over it to train people how to do it. And then it sort of just developed organically. And we would go around people's houses. And it's sort of become a sort of part of the Yorkshire, of Bradford, Keighley. It's sort of become known as this sort of gathering where people can come and connect. And that's really why I saw the significance of that. But then coming back to the names and the significance of the names, why? What is the importance of names? I've touched upon that because of obviously the connection to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. But what we have to realize from historically in Islam, especially in North Africa, there were 3 books that they say every traveller had in his backpack. And they were the Quran, it was the Shifa of Qadi Iyad, and then it was the Dalail Khayrat. These were 3 books. Now the Quran is, for a Muslim, his connection to God, God's word directly, him feeling a connection to God. And the Shifa is a explanation of the character of the Prophet Muhammad and what our duties are towards him, and what he's given to us, and how we should respect him. That's the whole book. And so it's sort of a connection, it's like a cognitive connection of an understanding of why we feel we have to devote time and devote meditation upon him and his personality. And then the Dalail Khayrat is the practice of that. It's sort of the affirmations, affirming with those understandings now of why he's due what he's due. And so these books they say after the Quran, the Dalail Khayrat was the most copied, obviously before the printing press, most copied book after the Quran in the Muslim community. So it was incredibly significant across the board. We're talking from North Africa all the way to Indonesia. It's recited and it's well known. And the names themselves is sort of what I'm going to talk about in my next talk in the next few hours, where it's a sort of bottom-up approach. This is a top-bottom approach. It's an affirmations, verbal affirmations upon your being of who this person is. And names are very significant. Why do we have, they say in Arabic that names, the more names something has, it reflects how important it is. Probably the best example in the Western world is, the way we can relate to it is the bad man comes in, he's the master of darkness, he is, and this list goes on about how he is. That's one way we want to, instill some sort of awe of this person. But also, you could go on about something because of your love and devotion to that thing. And so you just, like, their qualities, you're so overwhelmed by their qualities that you can't sort of just concentrate it in one name. And so there feels this need, because they've just done so much, they've offered so much to society and so much to human civilization, that it just, once you mention one name, another quality sort of emerges in your consciousness where you have to mention that, and it's sort of a knock-on effect. And so that's the idea of the names, and how it sort of instills this sort of devotion. Now, what I feel so important about this connection to the prophetic model, for me, I'm speaking personally as a young male, was role models. I feel very, very much, I feel very, very passionate about the point that the males really struggle to find good role models in their life. It's easy to find role models from the past, but often we struggle to find role models in the present. Now, Muslims recognize this, and obviously Thomas Carlyle, when he came with his history of heroes and so forth, he really saw that that was lacking in the Western world. This connection and this movement from boyhood to manhood, and how the male psyche needs to be able to attach itself to something in order to find relevance. And this movement of a movement from boyhood to manhood, and facing the fears of not knowing and making mistakes and failures, or mistakes, sorry. But despite that fear of the failure, still pushing on and moving on regardless of those fears, knowing that you can put your trust in something that's far beyond you, that will take you through this journey that has already been mapped out for you anyway. You just need to tread it. And this is a very, very powerful thing for me, and it got me really interested in Joseph Campbell and Jungian archetypes and all these sorts of things. And really, when you look at the names of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he personifies these four main archetypes of the male, which is king, which the Prophet ﷺ, he was known as Ruh al-Qist, one of the names of the Dalail Khayrat. He's known as the epitome, the Ruh, the very epitome of justice. And so, if you think about the quality of being a king, it's about you have responsibility, and you have a responsibility to be just and not take advantage of that responsibility over people that you have to tend to. The second archetype is the warrior, the fighter, the defender of the faith, which one of the names of the Prophet, of these 201, peace and blessings be upon him, is Qawi, is strong. So he has to have this element of strength, and physical strength as well, to stand up for the truth and defend it physically and mentally. And so this is the second archetype that Jung touches upon, is the warrior. And then the third archetype is the magician. And the magician, what it means by magician, it's not necessarily Harry Potter and Dumbledore, but what does that call to? That's what's important. It's a connection, it's a direct connection to the divine. And that you feel that there's something beyond you, an ultimate consciousness that is guiding you and that is there for you. And you can connect directly to that. And that's obviously in the name of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, Rasul, the emissary, because he's receiving a message and he's conveying it to the people. Which is what? It's clarity. It's like you've got your finger on the pulse, you know what's going on in the collective consciousness, you know what the struggle is, and you've got clarity for it, which is what people are, what people need, sorry. And then the final quality, which is very interesting, is the lover, okay? These are the four qualities of the man. Now, lover, it doesn't just necessarily mean what people think attribute love to. It's the compassion, it's the empathy, it's the emotional intimacy with himself, first and foremost, with the people around him, those closest to him, i.e. his spouse or his children primarily. And then through that relationship, a reflection of that is a connection to the divine, an appreciation of an emotional intimacy with the divine as well. And so these four archetypes, I discovered them far later, in a book called King, if anyone's aware of it. It's an old book, it's about 20 years old now. King, warrior, magician, lover, I've got the name here. One of the man is called, yes, Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. They speak about these archetypes. And they bemoan how there's no, we don't have elders within our community that are moving children, the boy, through these stages. And so that's the importance of the, for me, of this concept of the male role model and the heroism in history. And I am going to touch, last year I touched upon these themes with my talk on the borda, the mantle. And I know that Ramona, we talk about, which is a dilemma for us in society now, who's our female role models. We're going to touch probably that on the questions and answers, because that always comes up when you're speaking about males. What about the woman? Okay? And so I will address that as well. But for me, I'm speaking personally, as I am a man, and that, for me, growing up, that was really important to understand that significance. But then from an Islamic perspective, it's not just a person in history that we're trying to understand in a very different context. For Muslims, it's an idea that there is this connection, two-way connection. That connection first is through a passing on, a chain of people who are basically, because first and foremost, our education is through interaction. It's not cognitive. If you think about with our parents, we learn so much from our parents for the good and the bad. And we sometimes cognitively think, you know, oh, I'm never going to be like that to my kids, when, you know, the way our dad was with me. And then as soon as you get kids, what happens? You start shouting, oh my God, I sound just like my mother or my dad. Okay, why is that? It's because this interaction at a very early developmental stage has a massive leaves a massive mark on us psychologically and physically. And so there's this impetus to have this connection to people and to have them in your life regularly that personify those qualities of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. So there's a connection to the past through written connection, and there's a connection also physiologically and psychologically by being passed down from person to person. And so Muslims have, in the past, have been very, very concerned with this. And then the third one, the connection, which is very interesting from a religious standpoint, is the theological understanding that the Prophet and the prophets are still conscious in their graves. And that when we send our devotions, our peace and salutations and benedictions, whatever you want to use the word, or whatever word you want to use, that is being taken by angels and conveyed to that person, and they're still conscious of that, and they're conveying it back. That's a very powerful theme for people in a society today where we feel very disconnected from our past and feel very, very disconnected from any sort of type of tradition, and we're trying to work things out as we go along. And not only that, when the person actually comes before the grave of the Prophet, peace and blessing upon him, before his personality, the Muslim understands that he's actually directly conscious now of that relationship. So before it's been conveyed by angels to him, and he was telling the angel to take it back to the person. And then but when a person's directly in front of the grave, the shrine of the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, there's a direct connection. And so Imam Jazuli speaks about this in the poem that we're going to recite. We have the translation with that as well. It's like, if I can't even visit you, then you ask the traveller to convey your salutations. And if I can't visit you, then just the image of your grave is enough for me. And that's very significant for North Africans, because at that time, it was very, very difficult for them to perform the pilgrimage. And to a point where the scholars even said it's impermissible for them because of there was lack of safety across North Africa into the Middle East. And so there was this element of disconnection, feeling of disconnection. But Imam Jazuli was stressing that there's no disconnection. There's still a connection regardless of where you are. In time and place, you can still have a connection to him. So that's very important. And having that sort of religious need to connect to the founder of the religion is so, I find so fascinating in history, because when I did yesterday, I was actually in this lecture theatre, and we had a talk on the poem of William Blake, Jerusalem. And it's really interesting that at the beginning there's this play on Joseph of, excuse my pronunciation, Arimathea, is it? I don't know. And how that he was seen as a disciple of Jesus. In this mythology, he caught the blood of Jesus on the cross in the Holy Grail, and so it's a link between Christianity and King Arthur. And then he eventually ends up in Glastonbury, of all places. And he has this staff that he plants in the ground, and it grows into a tree, and they have this abbey built around it where pilgrims for centuries go and visit. You think, what a load of rubbish that is. People today, in a very logical world, very rationalistic left brain, they're thinking, what a load of nonsense. But you have to understand the psychology there, the importance of finding relevance to a religion far away, to your religious practice and significance here, in the place you are. And William Blake played upon that with Jerusalem being so far away, but it's that Jerusalem personifies a place of safety and a place of peace, a sort of utopian world. And so that's really important. And I think for us as Muslims, this is really, we're in a really interesting time where people are really struggling with this sense of identity and where we fit. And does Islam conflict with British values? Are we a problem to society, or are we contributors to society? Have we got something to offer? I think it's really important that as Muslims, we connect to our tradition. And taking me back, I'm very bad with time, so are we doing okay with time? Yeah. So I usually give Ramon, if you give me the thumbs when I need to. And this brings me back to where the beginning of the story really is why, what I found so interesting was with me as a young man, feeling very disconnected in England growing up, where I would support Romania over England in the football. And then moving to another country and just being absolutely bedazzled by this connection, because Mawli Idris, the founder of Fez, he has a direct bloodline back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. It goes Idris II, his father was Idris I, who is buried in Volubius, in a city outside of, about an hour outside of Fez, in a very beautiful, hilly city, situated amongst the mountains. And then his father was Abdullah, and then his father was Al-Hassan II, whose father was Hassan, the grandson of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, whose father was Ali and mother was Fatima, and whose father was the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So we see this connection, and how, this is also so fascinating for me, how because of the persecution of the family of the Prophet at this time, they were forced to spread out and disperse amongst the whole Muslim world. And in fact, that was a mercy that outwardly looked like, suffering, and it looked like torture for the people. When in fact, when we look back, it looks like we see the wisdom of why that happened, because it gave the whole Muslim world part of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And I even say, to contextualize things today, isn't it strange how even the Syrian refugees, they might have something to give to us. And from an Islamic perspective, we see refugees and immigrants as people that can give to society. When the immigrants moved from Mecca to Medina, it was seen as we have to support them because they may have something that they have to give that we don't have and be contributors to society. So not seeing immigrants as a problem and as a burden upon us as a community, rather, what will they bring? And when I moved to Morocco and was immersed in this culture, and this Andalusian culture that was there, that's still being preserved today in the music and in the architecture, and this fascination with who's buried here and what happened here, I found a significance so that when I came back to England, I felt a connection to my actual homeland, and in a very strange place, Keighley, which is actually ranked as one of the most boring towns in the whole of England, okay? And I actually became fascinated by the actual religious history of Keighley. It's got every single Christian denomination there. First spiritualist church, actually, in the whole of England. And you've got this, what I love about Keighley is just the complete paradox of Wetherspoons was a temperance hall That's fascinating, I think. Shows the paradox of where we are today. And so that's what we have to understand, that we all have our journey, and there's a separation, initiation, as Joseph Campbell speaks about, and a return. And we all have to go on that journey. And sometimes it means leaving our comfort zone. But when we do, when we come back, we feel great significance and we become contributors. So that's a sort of a wrap-up of why I feel this is very significant, and what the Dalail Khayrat had to offer historically, and why it's so important for Muslims historically. Okay? So without further ado, I'm going to call up my band of merry men. If you can all come up and we'll give you a rendition